Hey everybody, this is a little overview video of the answers for the week 2 unit assessment. Now the first thing I want to tell you is try not to overreact to your score for the first unit assessment. These scores tend to go up as we go on in this class. We're just starting in this class and you're just getting used to the reading, the material, and my expectations. So if you're looking at your grade for the unit assessment or your overall grade in the class and it's not quite what you're hoping for, there are lots of points. I think 98% of the points, maybe 97% of the points are still available in this class. We're just getting started. And as you take another one of these, you'll be better prepared, especially hopefully after you listen to me talking about the correct answers on these. All right. So these are in different order than you probably took them because I shuffled the questions. So let's take a look. Franklin discusses having a debate with his friend John Collins when he was young. What did they debate? Slavery? No. Female education? Yes. Science versus religion? No. American independence? No. Correct answer is female education. This is a question that comes straight from your book. One of the ways I make sure and incentivize that you're doing the reading is I will ask you some questions that are straight from the book that I don't talk about in a lecture. And if you read, you should have got that one right because he certainly didn't talk about those other things. He talked about female education in there. All right, true-false question. Benjamin Franklin only had 3 years of formal education. That is true. In part 1 of the autobiography, Franklin describes spending time trying to improve at writing. That's the correct answer. Physical fitness? No, he doesn't talk about physical fitness. Religious devotion? He talks about his religious views, but he doesn't talk about trying to improve at religious devotion. All of the above. No, there are 2 incorrect answers, so it can't be that. All right. What was one of the reasons Americans have been drawn to the story in Franklin's autobiography? I talked about this. It is the story of a self-made man. That is the correct answer. I told you about that. Franklin's vivid description of the Revolutionary War and events leading up to it. No, I specifically told you Franklin does not talk about the American Revolution in the autobiography, so that can't be the right answer. Franklin's views on religion that were shared by many Americans. No, I told you Franklin's views on religion were very unusual, from his deism to his other views. Franklin did not have mainstream religious views. All of the above? No, it can't be all of the above because there are 2 incorrect answers in there. Benjamin Franklin hated vanity in other people. That's false. We talked about how, and he talks about in the beginning of the autobiography that he understands a degree of vanity in other people and he puts up with it. He thinks vanity has some upside to it. All right. What did Benjamin Franklin's father do to help young Benjamin decide on a future occupation? Teach Ben advanced mathematics? No, he never talks about that. I never talked about that. Take Ben on long walks through the streets of Boston to observe different jobs? Yes, that's the correct answer. That's what his dad did for him. Introduce Ben to his rich and powerful friends when Ben was a teenager? No, he didn't have rich and powerful friends. He was a simple shopkeeper, a chandler, a soap and candle maker. None of the above. No, that's not right because there is a correct answer there. All right. Why did Benjamin Franklin leave Boston? Local political authorities were upset with him. That's true. Some people in Boston were critical of his strange religious views. That's true. He could not find a job as a printer. That's true. It's D. It's all of the above. Those were all correct. One of the reasons later generations of Americans have admired Franklin's autobiography is because of Ben's explicit advocacy for equality. That is false. I told you, nowhere in the autobiography does Benjamin Franklin explicitly tells you he believes or supports the idea of equality. I told you it's implied in the way he tells his story. It's not explicit. He never tells us, I believe in equality. But you can pick up on a commitment to it by the way he describes his life. All right, so that is false. The autobiography of Benjamin Franklin was immediately popular when Franklin published the book because so many Americans could relate to his story. That's false. I told you, Benjamin Franklin never published the autobiography. That it was published after he died. Okay, so that answer is false. Why has Franklin been described as the first American? He was the only one of the founding fathers to have family that came over with the Pilgrims on the Mayflower? No, that's not true. Because he was the first person to sign the Declaration of Independence? No, that's not true. He has been viewed as sharing characteristics common to later generations of Americans. That is the correct answer. That is true. I talked about that. Because he was the first person to vote to ratify the Constitution? No, that's not true. Okay. Why is Benjamin Franklin's autobiography usually divided into 4 parts? He wrote the autobiography during 4 times in his life. That is the correct answer. The first publisher of the autobiography after Franklin's death decided to divide the book into 4 parts. That's not why it's divided into that. 4 was Franklin's lucky number. It might have been, I don't know. But I never talked about that. D, all of the above. No, that's not correct. All right. Franklin's father enrolled him in grammar school because he hoped Benjamin would grow up to be a minister. True. That's true. Which was not a justification Franklin offered for writing the autobiography. For future generations to understand an important time in history? That's the correct answer. No, he never talks about that. He does not offer that as a justification. For his own pleasure of recollection? Yes, he talks about that. For others to learn from his success? Yes, he talks about that. For his son? Yes, he talks about that. So the last 3 are true. That first one is false, so that is the correct answer. What was the main factor that attracted Ben to the vegetable diet? Ben enjoyed the fact that the diet seemed to annoy his brother. We didn't talk about that. The diet did annoy his brother, but that's not why Ben did it. It conformed to some of his new religious beliefs? No, he never talks about that. He created the vegetable diet in that phony religion he created with Keimer later on, but we didn't talk about that in week 1 and week 2, and that wasn't part of his religious beliefs. That was a practical joke he was pulling, so that's not the correct answer. It was an inexpensive way to eat. Yes, it fit in with Franklin's great emphasis on frugality. D, none of the above. No, there's a correct answer. All right, and then finally, Benjamin Franklin became a deist when he was a teenager. Deists believed that there may be a God, but we can never really know for sure. No, deists believed there was a God. It was the God that created the universe. That what really mattered is morality, and as long as you were a good person, you will go to heaven. No, that's not part of deism. That was something that Franklin later embraced, but that was not part of deism. In fact, the reason Franklin abandoned deism because it did not have a built-in morality. That was the problem with deism, so that is not correct. That God created the universe, then after had no more involvement with man. That is the correct answer. All right? None of the above, that can't be right because there is a correct answer. Okay, those were the correct answers. All right. So again, try not to freak out about your initial score on this. And by the way, don't get me wrong. Lots of people did great. There were perfect scores on this quiz. So those of you that are doing great, good for you. Keep up the good work. Keep doing what you're doing. For those of you that didn't, you'll improve. You'll get better. You will start to get a sense of what I am looking for more. You might have to recalibrate and adjust some of the ways you study and that you approach. And then finally, look, stuff like this is what office hours are for. If you didn't do great on it and you want to know a bit more about what you could possibly do, come talk to me in Zoom office hours, okay? I can learn about what you're studying and what you're approaching, and maybe I could recommend some changes in there. Office hours have been lightly attended so far. There have been whole sessions where nobody comes to speak with me. So I highly recommend using that resource if you want to improve. Tell me about what you're doing, and I can maybe talk about how you can improve on some of those things. Okay, everybody, that's it. I'll see you next time. Bye.